Welcome to the Careers by Jenn podcast, episode 257. This time on the podcast, Jenn speaks with Dr. Lisa Orbé-Austin about the 5 keys to overcoming imposter syndrome. Oh sure, she has a PhD, but will you really listen to what she says? After all, what if there is someone out there who knows more about imposter syndrome than she does? What if there are actually 7 keys, not 5, and she missed a couple? Really, who is she to talk about imposter syndrome? And who is Jenn to interview her? And who are you to listen to this interview? And who am I to keep writing these introductions that aren't nearly as clever as I like to think they are? It just never stops.
You're listening to the Careers by Jenn podcast. I'm your host, Jenn Swanson. This is the podcast that helps you to get the job, love your work, and advance your career. Careers by Jenn is a listener-sponsored podcast, and if you like the content, please consider supporting the show as a patron. You can do so for as little as $1 a month. Head over to careersbyjenn.com and click on support to learn more. Hey friends, thanks for joining me in episode 257. And as the sassy intro guy said, we're talking today about imposter syndrome. And I know that I did an episode of this way back when with Tanya Geisler, so you might look that one up if you want to listen to that one. Like I said, I can't remember what episode number it was, but I thought it was about time to do this again because imposter syndrome is something that I've struggled with, and I'm sure that you have somewhere in your life too. It seems to be something that a lot of people experience. And so today I thought it would be interesting to bring on Dr. Lisa Orbé-Austin. She and her partner, Dr. Richard Orbé-Austin, are authors of a book called Own Your Greatness. And she will be here representing the two of them and talking about this book. Now, Dr. Lisa is a licensed psychologist. She's an executive coach. She's an organizational consultant, and her views about career management and advancement are regularly sought by the media. She's been on the New York Times, Forbes, NBC News, and other places as well. She received her Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Boston College and her master's degree in counseling psychology from Boston College and her PhD in counseling psychology from Columbia University. She really knows what she's talking about, and we had a really fun conversation. So I hope you enjoy learning all about imposter syndrome and the 5 keys to overcoming it. So Dr. Lisa Orbé-Austin, I am going to begin by asking you, what is imposter syndrome, and is there ever a time when you get over it?
So imposter syndrome is the phenomenon that people who are highly accomplished, experienced, and skilled have when they feel like those accomplishments are not real, that they haven't internalized them, so they feel that they're a fraud or they're truly incompetent. And as a result, they often overwork in order to compensate for that perceived fraudulence. And it's sort of a very taxing experience because you're constantly trying to prove yourself over and over again to others because you're so concerned about being revealed as a fraud. So you're very perfectionistic, you struggle with making mistakes because all of those are potential revelation points. And around getting over it, I think we say in the book that you're probably always going to have remnants of it. There's always going to be pieces of it. There's always going to be triggers. It's that you'll be able to manage those triggers better, and that it won't be in the forefront of your mind, that it will be in places where you can manage, and you'll have tools and skills to manage it so that it doesn't sort of lead your life in essence.
Yeah, it's funny because I've experienced it. We did a show on this quite a long time ago, and I've experienced it in my various career paths that I've been in. And I was just talking to a colleague the other day, actually. In my main role right now, I'm an ordained clergy member, and and I was speaking with another colleague because we're doing these virtual church services and that, and we were laughing. We were talking about how nervous we get when another minister colleague walks into our church on a Sunday morning and sits down, and we're like, oh no, were my historical facts right? Were my
Yes.
is what I'm about to say accurate and legit? And oh my gosh, and one of my colleagues has one of our former professors from seminary who's got a family member in the area and who often pops in. And I thought, oh, I would be terrified if one of my profs showed up, right?
Yeah.
Who's an expert in an area, and then there's me pontificating, right? So
Yeah.
it's I completely can relate to feeling like an imposter, even though rationally it's not true.
Yeah. And I think the experience that you're having with your colleagues and talking about that phenomenon is about this experience oftentimes that we overvalue other people's experience and we undervalue our own, especially people like mentors and people who we consider kind of in high esteem. Oftentimes we feel very concerned about their evaluation of us because we hold them in such high esteem, and sometimes probably in inflated ways because of the way the imposter syndrome impacts us,
So how can you sort of level that out? How can you bring it back into perspective and say, no, I do know what I'm doing. I've been doing this for however many years. I've been trained how to do this, and people appreciate what I do. Why do I feel this way?
It's by doing exactly that. It's by kind of doing the self-talk and realizing that the thought you're having is irrational, and sort of looking for evidence that what you're thinking in that irrational, and we call it an automatic negative thought.
Oh,
that
I
ant.
know. That's Jim Quick says that all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's that ant is irrational and that there is no evidence for it. For example, like with the kind of colleague, the esteemed colleague who's sitting in your audience, partly it's thinking about, well, have they ever criticized me in that kind of aggressive way? Would they ever belittle me? And if they gave me feedback, would I be able to handle it? And probably the answers are like, no, they're not going to like blatantly embarrass you publicly, and that the feedback would be useful to you if there was any to be had. And sort of being able to kind of, in some ways, normalize the real expectations of what would really happen, and be able to manage some of the irrational, and be able to say that that's my anxiety speaking, that's my fear speaking, and that's not really what's really happening here, and kind of ground yourself in what is really true.
Yeah, that's easier said than done, isn't it?
It takes a lot of practice. It's like it's grooving the brain to do and the thoughts to do something different than they're used to doing. But it takes a lot of practice and a skill to know, oh, that's an automatic negative thought. Okay, this is what I need to do with it.
Yeah, and I think that it depends. It's situational, isn't it?
Yes, because there are different triggers for different people. So what might be one trigger for somebody might be completely different for somebody else, even in the same field or.
And I wonder if you're doing something new for the first time. Like one of the things I also do when we're not in this COVID time is corporate training. And I'm contracted with a company that gives me the material, and I have to learn, read it, learn it, go over it, and then walk into whatever office situation and present for an hour to people, sometimes for 3 hours, depending on the subject. And a lot of it I know, and I used to teach at college, and I'm totally familiar with. But every once in a while, they throw me something, and I think, I don't really know this topic very well. So I study it like mad, but then I suddenly have to walk into the law society or something and give a presentation in front of a bunch of lawyers. And I'm like, why do I feel so inadequate in these situations?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it's really new situations are super common for trigger imposter syndrome. And also, moments that you feel like are high performance or high pressure can be another. So when you have a new audience, when they feel like they're very accomplished and you feel like you have to present this material that you should really know like the back of your hand, that can be very disconcerting. And you can imagine also when the material isn't yours, because when we have an imposter syndrome and we prepare something, we are very good at over preparing. So we cover every potential area for questioning. We like overdo the work. Like we know that if anything comes up, we have a plan. When the material is not yours, you're sort of delivering something that somebody else has formulated. So you have to find a way to kind of find ownership of it so that you don't lose your sense of bearing, because that can be really hard because some of it you know really well and some of it you know less well. And so if you get questioned, it can feel really, really threatening. But I often tell people or teach my clients about like those moments, when it comes at you, if something does come at you at a place where you have a weak moment, it's thinking about a response that allows for both your not knowing of the situation and simultaneously retaining your competence. So you can still be like, that's a really good question. I'm not sure I know the exact answer to that. I'm going to get back to you on it. And then kind of move forward. Then you still keep presenting and you don't get kind of bogged down in like kind of trying to answer it or making an erroneous statement, and then you get caught in something. So it really kind of, thinking about what to do in those situations where you are kind of like caught out there. We all get, kind of asked a question, we don't know the answer to it, and we just find a way to kind of respond. But if you have things to kind of prepare to say, it makes it easier.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I remember the very, very first time I was teaching medical terminology way, way back. And I remember teaching, and I was really new at it. I'd taken over for a nurse who had to give up the program, and I got hired in to do it. And I was madly studying the night before I had to present, to the class. And I was one step ahead. That's it, all the way through. And I remember this guy, and he said it with such a straight and serious face, and he wasn't a class clown, and I don't think he was trying to be funny, but it was so hard not to laugh because it was a ridiculous question. But he would ask me things like, does the shape of the fetus correlate at all with the shape of the ear? And you think about it and you're like, well, it is kind of the same shape, but that has nothing to do with anything. Like he would ask these really bizarre questions, and I don't know if it was a game. I don't know if it was to stump the teacher. But right. I just got really good at straight face going, that's a really good question. I have no idea.
Right. Right. And sometimes just even owning your not knowing, which is super hard when you have imposter syndrome, because it feels like it is like the beginning of the unraveling of the end of like sort of like how fraudulent you are. But I think to be able to kind of get to the place where you can be like, no, I actually don't know the answer to that question. And, I can look it up and figure it out. But, or like in a case where the question's inane, you're just like, I don't know, and just leave it because there's no one studying that.
No one else, people are sort of looking. And whenever I said I didn't know, his response was sort of, stroking his chin and going, Right. Which is like great.
Which could be triggering, right?
This was long before Google, but I've never forgot, I've taught that medical terminology. I taught for 20 something years in the end. And I have never, forgotten that student. But so if somebody is in a work situation and they're new at it and they've got to do a presentation and they're feeling this imposter syndrome, are there ways they can prepare before the presentation that would be helpful?
I mean, I think it's good so there's 2 cycles of imposter syndrome. The first one is when you get a high stakes project, or you get a project or a presentation, and then you overwork, you have the performance, usually get positive feedback, but then you re-engage the cycle again, having anxiety about the performance and always engaging that overwork cycle. And there's a second one where you get the project or presentation, you get performance anxiety about it, you under-prepare or you kind of self-sabotage, and then you do the presentation, you get mixed feedback. Anything negative coming from the feedback then becomes a way of being like, see, I'm completely incompetent, I'm completely a fraud. So I think to kind of identify which cycle you tend to get into, whether you're kind of the one who overworks from the start or whether you're the one who kind of self-sabotages, is a useful way to kind of think about, well, how do I intervene on this? So if it's a self-sabotage, you need to structure immediately. You need to have a plan, you need to structure, you need to plan sort of how this is going to work out. You need to stick to your plan when it kind of when you kind of feel the little self-sabotaging moments, you're getting off your plan, you need to restructure things again so that you stay on course. Because in some ways you're setting up the dynamic to being reinforced for the imposter syndrome. When you're one of those overworkers, it's really about being conscious of what is too much. And for us with imposter syndrome, there's never enough. Like, my husband always jokes about the level of research I put into a project, and he was like, "You've gone overboard. You can write like a tome about this." And so, like, I have people in my life that check me, and so like really kind of be like, "Nope, this is way too much. These are too many slides. This is overboard," and kind of can help me pull back, because it is my performance anxiety around sort of knowing everything and being on competence, old stuff coming back that I have to watch. Because also too, I've learned over time, as I've had imposter syndrome too, and kind of worked on my own experience, that I lose my audience and I lose my connection with people when I over prepare. And I think in the beginning of my own imposter syndrome, that was purposeful, because, you know, like if I could just present you with a ton of information, you never have any time to ask questions. I could never get challenged. But now I know that that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a dynamic experience where like I'm learning, they're learning, we're all having a really like comprehensive experience. So it's important for me to create space, but it makes me kind of have to manage my anxiety about perfection to kind of do that.
Yeah. I'm just trying to think of so it's self-awareness, it's knowing how you operate within, you know, the imposter syndrome realm.
Yep. Yeah.
and then deciding to like are there, so you have to identify which one you're in. And so either in one of them you shouldn't prepare as much, or you should, but you could, but you want to not, you know, vomit information all
exactly
over your
like
audience.
Overdo it.
And then the other side, you want to make sure you're not listening to those, you know, bad ideas bears sitting on your shoulder telling you, oh, it's okay to watch another Netflix show, you can wing this.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah. And have accountability partners, have people in your life who know your vulnerabilities for imposter syndrome around particular like things like presentations and big kind of like events, and who can hold you accountable for not re-engaging the behavior, because the behavior can be like, you know, really impactful in your life when you're overworking to produce something, and then, you know, you don't have much time for anything else. Like you're kind of like compressing your life based on your performance issues. So.
I remember when I had students in class, they had to do presentations in class as groups. And some of them were absolutely terrified to stand up and do public speaking. They'd been sitting in the classroom for months and, you know, chatting and getting along with people, but stand them up at the front and have them do something. And they were like bowl of jello, you know, just shaking and nervous. And a lot of them would say, I'm no good at this. And I wonder, you know, our bodies listen to that.
Yeah, exactly.
and oh, okay. We're not good at this. Let's not be good at this.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that kind of sabotage as well.
Yeah, and we have a chapter about that in our book around the narrative. So the narratives that you tell yourself that become your reality. And so it's really important to really challenge those narratives. And in some cases, like, you know, I had a fear of public speaking too. And I was a master at never having to public speak. Like I would just do all the work for the presentation and then everyone else would present it and I just could get away with it. And it wasn't until like I was in my doctoral program that a professor noticed it. She caught it and she was like, I see what you're doing. And I don't think it's good for your career. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's going to really impair you in your career. And so for the remainder of your time in the doctoral program, you will present in my class a 2-hour lecture every semester until you graduate. And I was terrified. I had really never even presented like 10 minutes anywhere, let alone like 2 hours. And the first time, like you probably can predict from what I had said, I had prepared so intensely. I had like 8 pages of single space, like 10 font like notes. And I literally read for 2 hours to this class. And I broke out in hives. I had patches all over the place. And the class was so sweet. They're a bunch of counselors, so they were super sweet. And they were like whispering to me, like, they're like, you're going to be okay. Like, it'll be over soon. They were like whispering these things while I was presenting. It was horrible. And I remember what she said to me when I went back to her office about the talk. And she said to me, like, she said, how do you think that went? And I was like, it went really badly. And she was like, yes, it went really badly. And she was like, but it will never go that badly again. We will work on this. We will develop the skill. And I think it's a really helpful, for me, reminder that, like if you have this narrative about yourself and it feels super calcified and you make decisions about who you are and what you can do based on that narrative, it never gets any better. It always gets worse. And so what's important to do is to face it and to kind of work on the skills and to deal with the embarrassment, to deal with the feedback, and the struggle to learn is so hard because you're not good in the beginning. It takes a really long time to be great at something. But to be able to tolerate that is so important to being able to craft new narratives about yourself and develop new skills.
What a gift that professor gave you.
She was amazing. She was amazing in so many ways. That was just one. But
has she heard
amazing.
This story?
I don't know if she's ever heard me tell it. I don't know. I don't think she has heard me tell it because it was horrific. I mean, I remember the kids looking at me and they were just so sorry. They felt so sorry for me. It was just so bad.
Well, and I've seen people do that. I've seen people hide in the back of the group and and very obviously knew the material, but had zero confidence in.
Yeah.
So what about the people that are overconfident? And I don't think it's imposter syndrome, but maybe it's cockiness. Maybe it's like super high confidence, which might be hiding insecurity, but without getting into all that. But what do you do with people who, I can do that, and then they can't?
Yeah. So people often, what's interesting about, I think when I started talking about writing this book and people would ask me, oh, well, is that, imposter syndrome, that experience where people are like, catch me if you can guy from like Leonardo DiCaprio movie, where he's doing all these professions and careers and he has no idea what he's doing. And I was like, no, it's exactly the opposite. Yeah. So I think like that's what I think a lot of imposters feel that they are, but they are not. Like people have imposter syndrome, but that's someone who is actually an imposter. They're not able to do what they say they can do, and they cannot meet it at a skill level. They don't have the credentials, the experience, the ability to kind of do things. I think underneath that, because often underneath that is sort of this, so it depends on who that is and what the characteristics are, but it is sort of reflective of sort of a narcissistic kind of character
artist.
And often underneath that is a lot of hollowness, emptiness, sort of like a feeling of like that they're not much of anything because there's a lot of absence of things, that develop that experience of the character in that way. So they have to build up this bravado around how fantastic they are because there's a lot of emptiness inside. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's often sort of what's underneath that is like there's a lot of hollow and emptiness. So there's this kind of blowing up of everything else.
That's interesting because the actual, I can't remember when I first heard it, but con artist stands for confidence artist. And I think that's really interesting.
Yes. Because they've got it at an art. It's, but it definitely usually their confidence doesn't sort of match their skill in those moments.
Yeah. That's interesting. I had a student once who, was absolutely sure she could do everything and was, super confident and so confident that it was arrogant and actually was making a lot of mistakes in her clinical practice in an emergency department. And people were not trusting her judgment and what she said she could do. And anytime anyone tried to correct her, she's like, oh, I know. Mm-hmm. And it took pulling her away and having a real heart-to-heart about what the heck is going on. And the whole thing was being completely afraid that she would fail and not wanting to fail at all costs and sort of had built this armor around her where any kind of criticism at all was an indication of failure. And it was really sad. And we ended up, getting her to start all over again and just having some really good coaching all the way through. And she was fine in the end. But it came across as nobody wanted to work with her because she was an awful person, but that wasn't true,
Yeah. So there was something inside missing. Yeah.
Something missing. So with the imposter syndrome, which is not that,
no.
The imposter syndrome is you are capable, you are able to, you just don't believe it.
Yeah. Yeah, you haven't internalized the credentials, the experience, the skills. You haven't internalized any of it. And, I see it oftentimes. I have executives who, who are in C-suite roles and who I work with who feel, that they are just a gigantic fraud. And any mistake they make is some kind of revelation of that, and they shouldn't have the job. And how did they get this? And meanwhile, they've clearly climbed the ladder to the point at which they could get that. And there's no indicators that they were ever fraudulent at any point. But they haven't internalized any of those roles, any of those experiences, any of the expertise that they have, none of it. It just sort of has kind of like they've always either attributed to a mistake, to luck, to an accident, to somebody who benefacted them an opportunity, but they never know how to believe that that's truly coming from their skill base. So that nobody really will do that consistently if they can, like you were saying about the emergency room experience, nobody kept letting her believe she was amazing if she wasn't, because eventually they were like, you're going to cost us a life, you're going to cost us something serious. And so people do eventually catch you if you like the catch them if you can, they do eventually catch you if you are fraudulent.
Yeah. So are there certain personality types that tend to fall into the imposter syndrome?
Yeah. So there are sort of like family history dynamics and other pieces that correlate. So codependence is one that sort of significantly correlates with imposter syndrome. So having experiences of codependence in your family or having it within you and is one. And then also sort of having narcissistic features in a family can also. So the things that we're talking about these kind of like truly fraudulent people, having these people in your life or people who are significant problems can exacerbate your own concern about your own imposterism.
Huh. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about the book, because we haven't said the title or anything. So share that with the audience.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Own Your Greatness, Overcome Imposter Syndrome, Beat Self-Doubt, and Succeed in Life. And it's a workbook. It's a book that's meant to kind of help you build the skills to help you to kind of like change the dynamic and kind of move the needle on it. So the idea is that what we did when we were developing the book was, our editor is fantastic, and she gave us a lot of freedom to think about what we wanted to do with the book. And, being my husband and I wrote it together, and both being PhDs, like, of course we went like, oh, this should be a research space, which we did. We scoured every bit of the 40 years of research, like we looked at all of it, and we thought about sort of what are the central interventions that really shift imposter syndrome. But it wasn't, because imposter syndrome isn't a mental health diagnosis, it's a phenomenon, it's an experience, it's not a mental health condition. It's not well researched, because if you think about sort of what gets funded, it's like from NIH, or in the United States, it's NIH or NIMH that funds different research. It's about diagnostic conditions. And so it doesn't get a lot of research, because there's not a lot of funding in it. So there was good research, but it wasn't like substantial enough where we could think about here's a system that actually helps move the needle. So we did incorporate some pieces of that were found in the research. And then we had to think about from our practice over the years, other than these particular interventions, what else moves the needle in our clinical work? What has actually helped people actually shift out of this? And then we entered that into a program. So it's a 3-stage model. It has 9 steps, and sort of going through each of these steps is taking you one step closer to kind of acquiring the tools it takes to kind of really be able to manage your imposter syndrome.
Good. And what inspired you to actually write it out and create a workbook for people? Was it a long-held dream? Was it something that, we should write this down? Were people saying, can you write this down? How did it come about?
Well, actually, it came about, interestingly enough, we were actually working on another book, a kind of like really large book about career with a developmental editor ahead of this. And we're sort of just like dealing with this really huge book. And our editor, who we didn't know, approached us, and she had seen us appearing in different places, had seen us being quoted in different places, and she just thought we'd be great. They had been thinking about this imposter syndrome book and wanted us to write this book. So she had approached us, and it just felt like such serendipity, because this was the central population we'd been working with for 15 years, with like really accomplished people who really didn't have a sense of how accomplished they were. And so it was just like, yes, all the yeses, because it was just exactly the people we loved working with, that we've been working with for so long. And we really thought it would be really cool to take this information and be able to give other people, broader than our practice, the abilities and skills to kind of really shift this. Because one of the things that's really sad when you have imposter syndrome is that sometimes you don't get to achieve all the things in your dreams because you're stopping yourself from believing you can actually do it. So you get trapped and stuck in places where people really know you are skilled and amazing, but they're utilizing that for their own benefit and keeping you stuck. So that's what our dream for the book is, that people actually get to be free to kind of live their dreams because they really can truly see the skills and abilities they do have. That's what we dream about for the book.
Is it building up of confidence?
Yeah, that's a piece of it, but it's a lot of things. It's sort of like having a community around you that really understands how your imposter syndrome functions and knows how to support you in the right ways. It's about being able to combat those automatic negative thoughts. It's about, shifting the narrative and figuring out what your narrative is about yourself and how do you kind of give yourself a different narrative that is actually meant to kind of push you forward rather than kind of keep you stuck. It's about understanding where your imposter syndrome came from and where the origins are from your own family, and then also being able to understand that those origins have created the triggers and we call them triggers and trap doors. So it's about sort of like understanding all these different components and using it as a system to be able to combat it.
That's great. In all of the work that I've done over the years, between teaching college and now in leadership in a mostly volunteer community made up of volunteers, one of my favorite things is growing leaders, is helping people step into their potential. Yeah. and encouraging them along the way, and in some cases mentoring them and helping them to believe that they can do whatever it is. And I remember asking a woman that I know to help me lead a 10-minute devotional time in a meeting, and it was intimidating for her because there were a lot of trained professionals in the room, and she was a volunteer layperson and all the rest of it. And I remember she shook the entire 10 minutes, but she did it. And wouldn't you know that a few years later, if I'm taking a day off or I'm off sick, she'll step in and do the whole hour now. Yeah. And does it beautifully. And but it was this whole progression of, oh my gosh, I can't even speak in front of these people, never mind write anything or produce anything. And now she can do it. So that's my favorite thing, is watching other people be able to step into what they are capable of. That's just my favorite thing in the whole world. Yeah. And so what you're doing is so important for helping people to do that and to be able to succeed. Yeah.
It's my favorite thing too, actually. I there's a moment, as a psychologist, there's a moment when someone walks into my office and I'm meeting them for the first time and they're telling me about their pain and the thing that they're stuck with, and they're envisioning what they want out of the work and their goals. And there's a moment for me where I can envision them down the road, and I just see it all. And for me, that's such a magical moment for me as a clinician, because I have in mind, I'm internalizing and have in mind the goals for what we're doing. And I always keep them with me. And to be able to see them at the end, fly, there is no happier moment for me professionally than seeing my clients, today actually a client emailed me and she's opening up her own business. And she's like, I just wanted to share this with you because I'm so proud of myself and I can't believe I'm doing it. And it's just there's just something about it. There's just seeing people actualize. It's just the best thing ever. Yeah. See them live in their glory. It's just an amazing thing.
That's what I loved about teaching, and I love about coaching. It's like making yourself obsolete, right? When they don't need you anymore, you've done your job.
Exactly. And I say that very clearly. When I'm talking to consults on the phone, they're saying, "Oh, well, how long does this take?" And one of the things we were taught, and I'm sure you know this language, but we were taught at the end of when you're terminating with your client. I hate that language. It's like death. Yeah. And so I always say it's about graduation. You're going to at some point you're going to graduate, and we're going to celebrate the heck out of your graduation, because I don't want you to always need me. I want you to be able to fly without me. There's no reason for you to need me forever. And so some people hang, so I have clients who have with me long term and they're fantastic, and they use me as sort of like a support and accountability partner to what they've already internalized. But, for the most part, it's about sort of like seeing people be able to take the skills and knowledge that I have and to take it with you so you have it too. And you can go and live your life, in the fullest way possible. Like that's just, it's what I love about my profession.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's the best. That's what I love about teaching and coaching and leading people. It's my favorite thing to see people fly. So,
yeah.
So where can people find you, Lisa? Where can they find you and your book? And it's not out yet, is it?
Yeah, it came out 2 weeks ago.
Just recently.
Track of time.
Okay. Yeah, I know.
I think it was 2 weeks ago. Yeah, at the end of April it came out. So it's on all major booksellers like the Amazon, the Barnes and Nobles, IndieBound, and my website's dynamictransitionsllp.com. And so we have you can find us there. We write a blog, and I'm a top LinkedIn voice. So I'm always blogging on LinkedIn. So I have a blog there too. And then, I'm on Instagram at Dr. Orbé-Austin. I'm pretty active on Instagram too. So those are probably the major places you can find me.
Great. And do you have one last piece of advice for our listener today?
Yeah, I think the piece of advice is go do something. Like if you're stuck in imposter syndrome, take one action to move yourself forward. Don't get stuck in sort of the rumination, the intellectualization about it. Go do something to move yourself forward.
That's great. Well, thank you for taking time to share with us today. This has been great, and
thank you so much for having me.
I love the energy and the advice and the passion that you bring to this conversation. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you having me. This is really fun.
You've been listening to Careers by Jenn with Jenn Swanson. If you like what you heard, please share this. If every single person listening today shared this episode with just one friend, our audience would be twice as big just like that. And the more people we can help with our content, the better. So help out a friend and help grow our audience by sharing this show with someone you know who would benefit from the content. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that, and together we can make a difference. Until next time, take good care.